twice in a day. If I bored you this morning, you can leave, I won't be offended. What I'm doing now is, I suppose, starting with some of the themes that I did this morning, so you'll notice 3 or 4 of the slides are the same, but there are some other slides. And the idea is to expand on some, there are 2 people left. The idea is to expand on some of the things said this morning, and then obviously to involve you guys. I was hoping to maybe make it kind of to get you discussing challenges on each of the tables, but there's so many tables, it's going to be very difficult to get around them all and everybody to speak. So I'll do it from the floor. I suppose first I should say, is there anything I said this morning that anybody vehemently disagreed with? You can put your hand up, I don't mind. Because I don't want to be going on and there's a load of you thinking, actually, he's talking nonsense. But anyway, here we go. Back. So you saw this morning, and I rattled through it a bit this morning, obviously. So I think the important thing to stress is that I don't want to be somebody that says everything's digital, it's all about digital, and it's the whole new world, and it's the new trend, and everybody has to do it. Because it's easy then in talent acquisition to think, well, do we really need to, are we going to go out there to find people like this and then find in 2 years' time it's something else? But this is obviously fundamental to the way we and other businesses operate. There's no going back. I mean, I talk to friends back in the UK, some slightly older friends, and I've said to them before, I bet you really, really wish you could wake up tomorrow and find that it's all over. There's no more mobile phones, there's no more internet, there's no more laptops. You can go back to doing things the old way. And quite a few say, oh yeah, I'd love that. But obviously it's not going to happen. Business isn't going to be the same again, and I'm not kind of a snake oil salesman on that. It can't be, because far too much is being invested. I think that it's important to understand that it's not so much to do with the date of birth, as I said this morning, but just in general, job seekers know more. They're a lot more savvy. I know that, I'm not sure if Bill's in the room, he's going to be talking at the end, having tracked a lot of job seekers through one of the tech companies. I've done my own, as I mentioned this morning, research amongst 14,000 job seekers as to what they look for. And you'll see on a slide in a minute, the interesting thing was that 70% of them said they were really happy in their jobs, but they were job seekers. I mean, to actually complete the research survey, they had to be actively registered with an agency going out on interviews. So although they said they were very happy where they were still looking for another job. This morning I mentioned Peter Capelli in the US talking about a lot of the people who changed jobs. Over half the people who changed jobs in the US last year weren't looking for a job. So people are finding more about jobs through LinkedIn, through email alerts. They've looked at your website maybe as a consumer. Somehow the algorithm sends them a job advert. You know how it works now on their phones and stuff with Google, and kind of you look to that site, oh, you work in recruitment, you might be interested in a job. And so it's important to understand that all that information is out there. The talent management side is possibly a bit more HR, but I think that one of the things, as I travel around the world at conferences like this and speaking to different organizations, it's much closer. HR and recruitment are much closer now. And I think the understanding, and because the process, if you like, the digital talent journey that I mentioned this morning, seamlessly moves on, there is a connection. Something like onboarding is actually between the two. Recruitment and HR own that, and plus the manager, everybody in the organization, plus the new person's team. And I think that historically we've said, well, that's our job. We fill the vacancies, we bring in the future talent, and then we pass it on. And if HR get it wrong, that's not our fault. But I was asked in a separate interview this morning, what's the key metric for TA? And I think increasingly it's quality of hire, which is the one thing it's impossible to measure, really. I mean, a lot of people try, a lot of companies do it by longevity, how long someone stays. You know, if someone's been there 2-3 years, that's a good hire. It's never really linked to performance management. It's never really, this person is a good performer, this person is doing well, they're learning, developing, growing, and that never gets measured. It never gets back to the hiring. Nobody says, where did this person come from, or it won't go back to you in a TA team and say, what was the source of this? You hired them, good work, where did they come from? And then you've got to try and chase that back, and it's like, well, I'm not sure. It wasn't through an agency, they applied to something, I don't know where they saw it through. And I think this understanding the link between somebody coming onto your website to apply for a job and actually being a good hire, however we define good, is an important link that needs to be measured. And I think this will become increasingly important as companies change, develop, and gradually require people with a broader range of skills. The challenges are there. I didn't kind of make them up for this morning. I'm going to say something different now. It's kind of, for talent itself, as opposed to the talent acquisition team, it's the future skills, understanding it. And if you speak to any, or read rather, any survey of chief executives, of C-suite people, of CHROs, talent acquisition leaders, it's always the same thing. Worry about getting future skills, getting the skills they need, and the quality of the future talent leadership, talent pipeline. And some of that comes, I said this morning, from redefining talent. What do we mean by it? What is success in this? What does success in this business look like? Who are the most successful people in this business? What behaviors do they exhibit? And is that why they are successful in this business, or is it something else? Is it something that we've done to them so we can actually take people from broader backgrounds, and because of our approach to learning, because of our different approaches, we are able to make people great performers, encourage and support people to be great performers. So I think it's, I made the analysis with kind of Labours of Hercules and then Game of Thrones, but it's a lot of the recruitment and assessment, as we were talking about with the interviews this morning, is done from fairly standard, talking back through someone's background, through their history. What did you do there? What did you do there? What would you bring to this role? You know, if we gave this team to you, how would you develop it? It's kind of going back to what people have done in the past. One-to-one interviews obviously suits people who are very confident, very articulate, might not be overly competent, but they've got the articulacy. That's a good person, had a really good conversation. They've done so much. But we don't necessarily check that up. Retention, onboarding, people stay with us, but we often don't know why. We find the most successful people, I've spoken to organizations who've said, look, we've had some great people work for us 2-3 years, leave us and come back. And they've been brilliant once they come back, because they've gone off and got experience somewhere else. So they've seen another aspect of things, and we can bring them back in. There are organizations that actually loan people to one another. I can think of one example with an airline in the UK, who, when they lay off, because the winter season for airlines is obviously, there aren't as many flights. So rather than just hire people on contracts for the summer, in the winter they actually had a reciprocal arrangement with one of the big retail groups, John Lewis, where their people went to John Lewis, they both recognized each other's training, and so you actually kind of kept that relationship going. They got sharper skills doing something else, and it was almost like loaning people to each other. There will be more of that. I know Pepsi Cola in the Netherlands, I don't know if they do it elsewhere, get their young aspiring leaders to go out and work in community programs, go out and do not social work, but work for the local community in programs. Sometimes they'll give them time off from work because they want them to be leaders in a community as well as leaders within the business. The more informed job seekers and the changing attitudes to work, I didn't say a lot about this morning, but when I started work a long time ago, I kind of wanted to do interesting things. I wanted to be listened to. I wanted people to take notice of what I was saying. But I was just told to well, the old quaint English expression was put up and shut up. In other words, just sit down, shut up and do your work. And I did that. I didn't do it because I was not a millennial. I did it because I needed the job. I needed the job because certainly in the UK in those days, a steady, permanent job that you stayed in was the only way to get a good bank account, to get a credit card, to get a loan to buy, or to get a mortgage. And so you really had to do a few years with an organization, and even if you weren't really enjoying it. A lot of those things, certainly in the West, I'm not 100% sure what it's like in India, a lot of those things, younger people entering the workforce today don't necessarily have those pressures. They can move around. The way they are treated becomes a lot more important to them because they can move if they want to. Whereas I could have been desperate to move in my job, but I had to stay to show banks and stuff that I was a good employee. And I think that is important because I know we talk a lot about gig work and freelance work, but that's not always by choice. And I think that a lot of the narrative, certainly we hear in recruitment and HR globally, is that there's a whole generation of people choosing not to have permanent employment. And that's not quite the case. A lot of them do it so they can build up a lot of skills quickly. A lot of them do it because they don't have an option. They are taken on for 6 months, a year. They are not taken on for a permanent role. And I think that if we rely too much on the fact that people are going to come in and go, then we don't build, we don't have the building blocks, we don't have the stability. And I think that we need to offer people a future. We need to, when we attract people, when we recruit them in, they need to be able to see overall what they can achieve with the business. Now, from my own research, a few stats. Now, 91%, in the research I did with the 14,000 job seekers, 91% said that they checked out a company before they applied. Now, I know that there is conflicting stats on that. I think Bill later, because I was talking to him about it last night, I think his research is going to show something lower. But certainly when we asked job seekers, before you apply, do you check out the company and check out what it's like to work there, 91% said they do to some degree. 2/3 of them pretty much say that what other people say about working there influences their decision to apply, and it's then how they're treated during the application process that will make a decision on whether to join, which is still a high percentage. So if you leave them waiting, if they don't like it, if they go weeks not hearing anything, if they don't like the tone of the interview, it will reflect on you as a potential employer. And it's about 1/3, as I said this morning, who will drop out of an interview process, even if you like them and thinking of hiring them, because they hear something else negative about you, or because they like it, they dig a bit deeper. And nowadays, with social networking, it's very different. So it's very easy now for somebody to say to another connection, somebody they're at college with, somebody they're at school with, somebody they worked with in a previous company, I'm interviewing with ABC. I just make one up because otherwise I'll choose the name of an organization here or something. I'm interviewing with ABC, they look quite good, and somebody will say, oh, hold a minute, I know somebody that worked there, and I'm pretty sure they didn't like it. And then they'll come back and say, actually, no, it's not that person. It's someone I know, their neighbor worked there and didn't like it. And that's all it takes. It's kind of, we're all connected. It's very easy to ask online, and they do. I look at my son's 24, and he would go online and say to friends, listen, I'm going to this company, what do you know about them? And eventually somebody will come back with something. And as I said before, 70% say they're very committed and engaged where they are, but they're actually registered job seekers. The application process is important because so many people say that the way they're treated will impact whether or not they join you. 30% will drop out at the interview stage, mainly because it's length of process. As I said, the main reason people don't complete it is it's taken too long and they've got an offer from somewhere else, but it can be because they've heard negative things. Now, I referenced this morning. I said I'm not putting the graph up because it takes a little bit of explanation. But because I've got longer today, I will explain it to you. I will say that this was from research done by a small consultancy in the UK about 18 months ago. It was only based on smaller companies. It wasn't based on large global companies. But the trend, anecdotally, the trends that they found replicate everywhere. Whenever I show this chart, if it's to somebody with a global multi-billion-dollar corporation, they say, yeah, we know that. It looks messy. It's based on Net Promoter Score, which I think has been mentioned earlier today. It's how somebody feels. Are they positive or negative? And the idea of the Net Promoter Score, it gives you a percentage. So a brand like Apple has a 75% Net Promoter Score. There are other brands that will have a negative Net Promoter Score because people feel negative about them as opposed to positive. And this was asking job seekers who had joined a company how they felt at each stage of the process. And they were asked how they felt on 4 things: how engaged they felt with the organization they were going through the process with, how they felt about the information that they were getting, how they felt about the speed of the information they were getting and the process was going, and how respected they felt by the organization. And the important thing is engagement. And I say it because it starts off quite high, it dips after application because they don't hear anything. But it dips at its lowest point before their second interview. And that's the point that everything else is lowest, including the information. And that's when we want them really kind of motivated and engaged. It rises, and it's at the top. Well, offer rejection. Rejection bit is that they've got something, because a lot of people go for interviews 2-3 times and never hear anything again. So a lot of that is they have an answer, but because we're looking at people primarily who got a job, that's very engaged at the offer point. But then, where are we down there? It's kind of information on the notice period. It's flat, it's lowest, it's second lowest during the notice period, when they should be so excited about joining us. And it's because the lack of information is there. It's slow, which is why I was saying this morning, onboarding has to start early. And it starts when you first interview a group of candidates, likelihood is at least one of those will get the job. And the likelihood is at some stage in the next year, 2 or 3 of those you interview might end up working for the company as a permanent employee, as a contractor, as a consultant. It's going to happen. And so we need them engaged, even if we're not necessarily going to do something with them immediately. But to kind of just let it slide and break that chain means that when we do come back to them, they might feel less inclined to say yes to us. Now, I was saying about digital transformation this morning and likening it to Millennium Bug and things, but I think it's important to say what it is, because it's an organizational change. Now, if this was HR leaders, I would now go off at a tangent explaining how people are not supported. It's an organizational change, but we don't support people through it. We're changing the way they do their jobs, but we don't support them through that. But for TA, the important thing to know is it is a change, therefore the type of people we hire might be different. You might have line managers, particularly in areas, I don't know, like marketing, for example, who might say, I don't care about the tech, I just need good marketing people. But they need good marketing people who can operate digitally. So there is a change, even if they might not realize there's a change. That's, I suppose, your role in TA to let them know. It doesn't have a defined end. It's not a project that's got a beginning and an end. It is ever ongoing. That's why we talk about needing people who are flexible, who are open to learning, who are looking to be lifelong learners, grow, develop, try new things, because we know that that's what the future, as far as we see the exponential change, that's what the future is likely to be. It requires different leadership mentalities. It was noticeable in the research I did that when we said what qualities they look for in leaders, people are talking about honesty, accountability, responsibility. They weren't talking about the more authoritarian things, about decisiveness, confidence. They're looking for something a little bit different in leaders. And also, it's in a changing world that is also changing. The rewards And I know that that's possibly not 100% under TA's remit, but kind of how we communicate the rewards at the first, second, third interview. We've got, the change in the organisation, the change in the way work is doing, and the change between the generations means that people are going to want different kinds of rewards, different kind of benefits, and we need to be more flexible in that approach. And upskilling is not traditional training. There's a lot of people that assume that you get people in, you put them on a course, and if you go through a bit of a transformation, you put them on a course. People don't want that learning. They want something a bit different, which I'll come to in a moment. When it's hiring digital talent, it's important to know what it is to do the job and what the job is now and what it's becoming. Because a lot of hiring managers, whenever I have workshops, they always say, well, the hiring managers give us this job spec. Lord knows how old the job spec is because, we've recruited this role 3 or 4 times, always to the same spec. The thing is, it is not the same job, and it will not be the same job. And as I was saying this morning, you're the internal consultant. So whilst you might have a hiring manager who leads a big team or leads a division, you're the person with knowledge of the skills and what's happening in the market and who's available and what people are looking for when you meet them. And it's kind of influencing that person to say, you know what, it doesn't matter what the last person did that you're replacing, because the person coming in is going to be doing something for the next 2, 3, 4 years. It's going to be very different. The robot-proof skills, I call them human skills here, that I mentioned this morning, it's understanding how to assess those. We'll look at a little bit about the interviewing side again in a moment. As I said this morning, the face-to-face interview, a lot of people are finding it doesn't deliver. And that, I think, is because they're not gaining a full understanding. They're hiring somebody, as I said, gives a very confident presentation, answers all the questions, knows exactly what they've done. But there's no real finding out the makeup of that person, how they're going to adapt, how they're going to change, what their real ambitions are in life, how flexible they are, what they're like in, I hate the VUCA, but I mean in a more uncertain, complex, ambiguous working environment, how they're going to react. Talent will join you because they're going to see the opportunity to learn and grow, and that's why they stay, so that has to come through. And if that means speaking to the L&D department and getting them involved in explaining to people at interview process how they're going to have the opportunity to learn and grow, that's something you can do. And as I said earlier, rethinking the reward. The learning side, we did a big piece of research with Instructure, who are an American digital learning business, and their subsidiary Bridge, who are mainly in Europe at the moment, and that's much more about performance management and stuff. But we spoke to 2,500 and researched rather 2,500 employees and spoke to a number of them on interviews. And only about 1 in 6 actually now like face-to-face learning. They want to just go online at the time they need it. They want access to learning as and when they need it. So they come up against a problem, they come up against something while they're at work, they're not sure what to do. They don't want to speak to L&D who put on a course in a month's time. They actually just want, a bit like home, when you're trying to do something, you're not sure what to do, you go on YouTube, you find a video telling you how to do it, and you do it. And that's the kind of way they prefer work. And they actually prefer to access it directly from a device as opposed to go into a classroom. So some don't mind going home and doing it, but they expect to do it as and when the situation arises whilst they're at work, which is an important thing, because I was speaking at an event in the UK, not unlike this, and somebody put their hand up and said, that's because they want someone else to pay for their learning. I said, well, you're paying them to do the job, therefore part of that is them learning how to do it better. He said, no, I pay them to work. They learn in their own time. Now, okay, that's a slightly antiquated attitude, but there will be people in your business that think, hold on, I need people doing this stuff. I don't need them looking at videos of how to do it. So I think it's important that you yourself, as TA people, understand that's what people are looking for, and be able to communicate that to the rest of the business. So, what I said this morning, I'm going to go through these and then open it up to the floor. The move from basically reactive to proactive. Yes, a lot of the time you'll be filling vacancies. You will have your relationships with hiring managers who say you need to get me somebody like this. But it's got to be more proactive. The future for talent acquisition is proactive, being the if you like, the expert on skills, on how skills are effectively growing in the market, the kind of people who are looking, the kind of skills you can get in easily, the kind of skills you might have to go out and search for, the type of people you're going to have to upskill once they come in. But understanding all of that, what the talent flow is like in your region, what it's like in your industry or sector, understanding, I'm not 100% sure what kind of labour market information you get, say, from the government, for example, here. But certainly in the UK and Europe, we get a lot from the government, who every month release, how many people are in work, where the shortages are, which are the regions doing the most hiring and stuff. And there are, you saw Indeed present this morning. Companies like Indeed will have lots of information if you have a relationship with them, and will be more than happy to supply this kind of information. Understanding the future, so actually sitting down, it might be sitting down with the tech team and finding out what is being planned, what's being rolled out next, what different kind of people might we look for, having a plan for how to find them, having a plan for how to attract them. The recruitment process, so many people get deterred during a recruitment process. It's kind of, it's a recruitment process that has to, in fact, welcome people. If you're inviting a stranger into your home, it's kind of, you want to welcome them. You don't put them through the kind of like 10 steps, say, prove you're worthy of stepping over the front door. It's kind of inviting them, come on, let's make it easy. Let you show us what you can do and how good you can be for us, as opposed to we want to find a reason not to hire you. Automate that kind of 80% thing I mentioned this morning. If you could automate 80% of a recruiter's job, what would you do with that time? There are companies that would just sack 80% of the recruitment team, think, great, there's my ROI. But it's kind of, what would they do with that time? Most of it will be doing what I'm explaining now, internal consultancy, actually do longer term planning. And the total talent management, actually building relationships with suppliers and individuals in the marketplace and platforms where you can hire in skills if you need them for a short space of time to work on a project or a particular assignment. And so it's the case of being business focused, marketing led, experts on future skills and how and when to find them at the right time, and understanding the trends, and some of it might be doing your own research. Rather than investing in lots of tech you're not sure you're going to get something from. You can invest in people to go out and do some specific research on your market sector, on your region, on why people, certainly get research done on people that you've had through your application process. If you find that 15% or something of the people who you've made offers to in the last year overall, over the whole business, have said no or something, it's worth finding out why. Some managers say, don't care if they're not interested in us, not interested. But doing some kind of backup to and that's why an independent, if you say, why did you say no, they're never going to give you the real answer. But if you do it through an independent source, you might find out some things that you didn't realise. And of course, understanding what it is within the business that drives the retention and knowing the kind of experience. You can talk to the rest of the business about the employee experience the people you're interviewing want, because you'll be talking to them about how they work at the moment, what kind of things they're looking for in the future, what kind of places do they feel comfortable in. And in the main, the employee experience people want is to feel supported in their growth and development. It's not so much feeling loved and wanted, it's feeling that they're in a place where they can produce their best work, they have a manager that enables them to produce their best work, and a culture that supports their growth and development. And, if they're working on projects that are new, it's a no-blame culture. They're not going to lose their job because something they've been working on and something they've tried hasn't worked. At that point, I want to throw it open to you guys and say, firstly, does anybody have any questions on anything I've said? Or secondly, does anybody want to share any experiences or ask me anything, or the floor is yours? Somebody needs to say something. Gentleman here.
Hi. I just wanted to pick your thoughts around as you had mentioned sometime during your discussion that the distance between recruitment and HR is sort of reducing, with technology and with the fact that there's going to be there's already a very high level of involvement in the entire selection and search process by the HR team. My question to you is, where do you really see the role of a non-technical, non-bulk hiring in-house recruiter at first leadership positions in organizations? Because the more I see it, it's essentially becoming more and more involvement of the CHRO or the HR head, or in terms of really understanding the talent market. And right from the time you really reach out to the person, build the connection, and of course you have obviously the retainer search agencies who help you do that. And then doing all the assessments and doing all that which you've talked about in terms of making the candidate welcome and really finding the right fit. I think a lot of it is, or making sure that you really design the role correctly and you set out the right path for that person in terms of goals and expectations and the performance contract. So all of that essentially is now becoming more and more HR driven, and unless and until it's a bulk hiring or a supply chain kind of a hiring, like in IT or BPO, where do you really see a role of an in-house recruiter evolving?
An in-house recruiter in volume?
Evolving. How do you see that role evolving in future? I mean, would it really be relevant to the extent which it is right now, maybe?
In terms of volume recruitment?
No, I understand
leadership?
For volume and bulk hiring, we do need in-house recruitment.
Yeah.
But I'm saying if you do not have that...
Oh, sorry, right. Well, you're still an advisor. You're still the person who understands the job market. Every business of a certain size and above needs somebody, I believe, that understands the job market, understands the talent market. So there is something in that. I think the role is being an expert in kind of what is happening out there. So how people are changing jobs, why they're changing jobs, where they're changing jobs, what they're looking for. So some of the stuff that I've mentioned to you, some of the research I've quoted, you've heard other people quote. I know Bill's doing a bit with you, I think at 5 o'clock. That's the kind of thing you probably need to be accessing. People like Indeed, as I said earlier, I don't have a relationship with them, but they spoke earlier, so I'll reference them. They will have reams of information. The problem is historically there hasn't been that. So a manager, a director needs a senior person. They just stick an advert out there, interview people, click with somebody mainly because they've got the same sporting interest or something and hire them. And then 6 months later, they're going through the whole process again. So I think there is a role for the in-house recruitment team to be the internal consultants, the link between external talent and internal needs and culture. In terms of a leadership position, in terms of recruiting senior positions, I think it's understanding, I suppose, again, mapping out the market. So I would say think like a recruitment agency, a staffing agency. What they will do at a senior level is whenever they meet somebody, they'll be asking about other people they've worked with, who do they rate in the market, what leaders in their own business do they know, and actually build up a profile, making notes of other people. It's a lot easier now with LinkedIn and things. Build up a profile of the kind of people who are out there who seem to be performing well in environments or cultures that appear to be similar to yours. And those are people you can approach directly or you can specifically market to. But I think there will be a role. I mean, volume hiring, as you said, I mean, a lot of it is outsourced to third parties now anyway. But it's being that expert, the consultant, the person with the knowledge of all of the things I've said. So what the external market's like, what people are looking for when they move in, and why people join companies, why they stay there, why they leave them, particularly why people join companies and leave within the first 6 to 12 months, being able to actually run almost like masterclasses for internal senior people to say, this is why people join and leave, and this is what we must stop doing.
Okay, thanks.
Gentleman here.
Yeah, I'm sorry I did not read your book, but I was going through a quick review of the book. In fact, you mentioned that a research in your book that the cost of a senior hire attrition is 213% of the annual salary. So you also spoke about quality of hire. How do we actually measure that? So let's take the case of some senior leaders who did not last long in the organization. Take the case of John Flannery of GE. GE is actually known for leadership development. He could not last for 1 year for reasons whatever they are. So this is some challenge which organizations are grappling with, that we normally tend to go wrong in hiring the senior leaders. So what's the role of these personality profiling tests and all these psychometric tests? Do you think that would be of any help to us?
It's when I suppose I started in the started work, but yeah, I mean a lot of was made of these kind of Myers-Briggs or Thomas International. I don't know how far they reach, but about are you the old salesperson's dominant influence, steadiness, compliance. It's possible to game those. It's possible you kind of know, if you're switched on, you kind of know what people, the kind of role you're applying for, the kind of things people are looking for. I think that is why I mentioned this morning the kind of soft skills assessment, job auditions, actually giving people tasks to do. I know for senior leaders that might sound a bit, they might not want to do that. But I think it's understanding their background. So it's understanding the company they've come from. It's understanding what made them successful in that company. And understanding how that translates to your company. You get this a lot in sport. It's easy to do sporting analogies, but I mean, a player who's successful in one team won't necessarily be successful in another team, even though they have the same record of games, wins, and points. Everyone has their own culture, and the same with managers. Some managers, if you look at football internationally, some managers are checkbook managers, as we say. They just sign the biggest players and manage their egos. Others buy young players, develop them, and because they've got the passion and hunger. So I suppose it's understanding culturally. I think that the problem with the psychometric tests is that, as I said, for a leadership level person, they are possible to gain. But also, they don't necessarily show you how people will perform in specific task-based environments and what their vision is. Because leader, you're looking at vision. As I said, what's changing is if you look at the work of people like Brené Brown in the US, leadership qualities that people are looking for are things like accountability, honesty, and people who take responsibility, don't palm it off. And the more autocratic qualities aren't so important to people now. They want to look up to their leaders and believe in them. They don't want the old, you're hired, you're fired, I'm a tough decision maker type leader. And it's not really, it's not that easy, I suppose, to understand those qualities unless you spend time with the person. But also, I suppose, see how they would handle certain situations. So I suppose job auditions or a form of job audition in that kind of, okay, here's a situation we had, how would you handle something like this? And then validating whether or not that person has handled it like that in the past, or if they hadn't, the lesson they learned was to handle it like that in the future. I suppose that is more relevant. But that's a personal view. I mean, I don't, if one of the big leadership recruiters, I suppose, or the executive search who operate at that level was here, they would probably say that, that they have a myriad of personality assessments to do. But as you say, they often get it wrong, headhunters.